This is Georgina Rose, and welcome to the Postmodern Iconoclast, a podcast that helps you destroy and break the false icons and idols of the digital age in search of a more authentic esoteric spirituality. On this podcast, we discuss ideology, esoterica, and everything on the fringes of mysticism, religion, and related topics. Hello and welcome to the show. This is your host, Georgina Rose, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about a subject that relates to some of the previous discussions I've had people come on this show for, and that is the sort of broad theme about the connection between our body and our spirit. And in this episode, we're going to be specifically focusing on the monthly hormonal cycle that women go through that has really important ramifications for us, and what that means and how it relates to our consciousness and, what is beyond the physical. The guest we have today talks a lot about this sort of subject. Can you introduce yourself, what you discuss, who you are, and all that?
Sure. My name is Athena Wilder, and I am the woman behind Wild Willing Wisdom and the Cosmic Conceptions podcast, where we talk all about fertility astrology, the void of preconception, and kind of smashing through some of our mainstream narratives.
I guess we should sort of start with the kind of bare bones of this conversation before we get into, these broader ideas like astrology and whatnot. So what is sort of the monthly hormonal cycle, and how does this, like what is it on that base level? And then we'll sort of move from there.
Sure. So basically, I like to put it in terms of internal hormonal rhythms, and there are certain hormonal rhythms that both men and women share, such as the circadian rhythm that allows us to rise with the sun and sleep with the moon in the night. But then women have a unique internal hormonal rhythm that is different from men's hormonal rhythms, in that men have more of a 24-hour internal hormonal clock that, it cycles through very quickly. It's basically a day-by-day cycle, whereas women have an internal hormonal cycle that lasts for the duration of their menstrual cycle, which for most women on average is, 28 days. But of course, actually more specifically, I believe it's about 29 and a half days, which is like exactly the length of the moon's cycle. But of course, every woman's cycle is going to look different, and there's going to be a little bit of variation in length, and there is a window within that, which that can look normal. And that rhythm, is broken down into 4 major internal seasons. So it's a little bit more in depth than what women are kind of taught when they're introduced to their menstrual cycle, in that you're not just, bleeding and then not bleeding, right? So there are 4 different major phases that your hormones take your body through to get you from the first day of your cycle to the last day of your cycle.
Yeah, I mean, it is something where people really are taught that it's like bleed, not bleed. And I really find it fascinating how the men and the women's cycle correspond to the sun and the moon respectively, because those are kind of the correspondences that are given to masculine and feminine, with most systems saying the sun is masculine and the moon is feminine. Mm-hmm. You used the word season to describe these phases, which I find interesting, because in a sense, I mean, everything is seasons, everything is circular. What are these seasons, and what do they kind of represent?
Yeah, so we're going to look at the seasons in terms of being sort of archetypal representatives of like the major shifts in hormones that are happening as you move through your cycle. Technically, day 1 of your cycle is the first day of your bleed. So in that season, we're looking at archetypes that have to do with wintertime, with the crone archetype. Many women are familiar with, the maiden mother and the crone, with the new moon. So this is a time of, deeper rest and restoration. So this is when, the earth is kind of barren and things are hibernating, and you're sort of planting your seeds before you kind of unfold and bloom into the remainder of your cycle. So the season that will follow after that, of course, is going to be spring, and spring is sort of representative of the follicular phase. So this is when all of your hormones like estrogen, follicle stimulating hormone, they start coming back online and flooding into your system in a way that ultimately is contributing to the ripening of an egg in your ovary, so that ovulation point can be released. So the spring season or the follicular season is often associated with the maiden archetype. It's usually more playful and creative. It's when we're just kind of starting to come back out of our shells, or what I sort of refer to often as the womb cave, when we're in that winter season. And then the follicular phase opens up into the moment of your ovulation, which is represented by the summer season, the archetype of the mother. This is when it's even been scientifically, for what it's worth, proven that women's faces become more symmetrical and more, stereotypically attractive. And there's something about our pheromones and our energy in which women are actually statistically more likely to experience success during this season in activities such as scoring a business deal, or organizing a party, or doing something that is helpful for your community, being in a leadership position, nurturing somebody else, right? So this is a season where you can really capitalize on that peak hormonal moment, and give during a time when you have a full cup to give from, right? Because oftentimes women are operating from this space where it's just like mother, and give, and show up, and, try to pretend that you're operating on that man's 24-hour schedule. And then we don't honor these seasons when we should be resting. And so it's nice to, you'll see how when you go around the wheel, there's opportunities for rest, and there's opportunities for energy and for giving. And so this is a really nice, appropriate season for setting yourself up for success with projects and giving back to your family and your community. And then, the season that follows is probably the most misunderstood season of the entire cycle, of course, because it's even been pathologized by medicine by calling it PMS, which actually stands for premenstrual syndrome, as if, by experiencing the things that we do in this season, there's something wrong with us. And of course, there is a range of normal, and there's a certain ease to our cycles that all women have the capability of experiencing. But for the sake of this conversation, the luteal phase is kind of when, it's after the egg has been released, and you obviously experience it if that egg has not been fertilized. So this is when the lining of your uterus is thickening, preparing to receive that fertilized egg, and nourish it and help it develop into a full-term pregnancy. But when the egg is released and is not fertilized, now this womb lining is building up and getting ready to shed. And this luteal phase is associated with the autumn season. And the archetype to represent this season has been called many things by many women who are doing sort of womb work. I like to think of her as the sorceress or the creatrix. She is somebody who tends to be extremely efficient and kind of cutthroat and seeing through the bullshit, right? It's a really great time to finally clean out your closet or cut the fat from your creative projects, or just identify things that are no longer serving you in your life, and being bold enough to sort of get rid of all of that. So some people will associate this with bitchiness. I think that's sort of like the shadow side of this archetype, and one that women unfortunately kind of sink into instead of learning how to wield as a superpower. And then, of course, that will then bring us right back into menstruation and the winter season and the crone and that resting period before you enter into your follicular spring phase and you get to do it all over again. So you can see how even through our menstrual cycles, not only are we connected to the lunar seasons, but we're also a reflection of the Earth Mother's seasons. And of course, in our current society, there's not a lot of appreciation for this. Women are now finding themselves in a place in which they're trying to be men in a man's world instead of learning how to be women in a co-creative, dualistic world. And so I think that this is really underlying a lot of the menstrual female health fertility problems that our current culture is coming to terms with.
General cultural idea that a lot of modern women have about their cycle is that it's kind of this nuisance.
Right.
And going through all these seasons, you hear it and you think about it, and you're like, yeah, I actually do experience all of that. But I feel like people, they put it so far in the back of the mind that they forget this. Do you think that people should and women should kind of align their month around this cycle and sort of use it as a guiding of what we do? Because right now, it just, so many people are just trying to turn it off and ignore it, and pretend that it's not a thing we're experiencing at all times.
Absolutely. And I think in some ways it can feel overwhelming because, you go from living a life where you're just sort of dissociating from your cycle to then all of a sudden being introduced to all of these seasons and archetypes and, oh, you're supposed to do this activity during this season and that activity. And, and it kind of feel like, whoa, this is way too much. I have a job. I have kids. Are you kidding me? How am I supposed to keep track of all this? But I always like to at least encourage women to start with their bleed, because most women in our current culture really do require such deeper amounts of rest and nourishment than we're allowing ourselves to take on. So however you can work around your current lifestyle to honor that and to take that time to rest and nourish yourself, that is really a great place to start. And then moving forward, you can kind of start having more fun with it, because it is supposed to be fun, I think. I mean, I like to think that being inhabiting a woman's body in this lifetime is a great privilege, and that it can be very fun, that it doesn't have to be a punishment. And honestly, every woman's cycle is going to be different. So it's nice to sort of introduce yourself to these concepts and then really turn inward and start noticing how you personally are experiencing your cycle and the things that you want to do during each of the phases. And you'll start noticing that in doing so, you'll become so finely attuned to your emotional landscape and your hormonal landscape that you won't really need to be looking at a calendar every week to figure out what season you're in. You'll just naturally kind of be able to tell. And then you can orient your days around those intuitive impulses. Oh yeah, I'm feeling really I'm getting luteal this week. I'm going to do this project that I the kind of cleaning the closet project that I haven't been wanting to do all month. It'll start to become more natural and part of your own attunement skills.
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to sort of ask you about, and it's something that's kind of intuitive, right? People associate women with the moon, the divine feminine with the moon. I wanted to explore a little bit about the lunar connection to this, because obviously we know the timing is pretty similar. But how do the actual kind of phases connect to the sort of phases of the cycle?
Yeah, so typically we associate, the new moon with menstruation and the full moon with ovulation. And then, of course, the moon is waning and waxing, in between those cycles. And for a long time, a lot of women in sort of the more earth-based, spiritual-based, return to the red tent kind of space. Online, we're talking about, if you cycle with the moon in this way, it means this thing. And if you cycle with the moon in the other way, it means that thing. Mostly like that if you bleed with the new moon, then you're in a season of procreation. Because you're technically in sync with the moon. But then if you flip and you bleed with the full moon, then you're in a season of giving. And honestly, I'm not really sure where all of these narratives have come from. I actually am not clear on like whether or not is rooted in any kind of like specific lore, or if it's just sort of like a narrative that has kind of cropped up and spread around in the age of, social media. And some women just haven't felt that they have related to that concept, even though it does feel romantic to imagine women in the whole community, all bleeding with the new moon and ovulating with the full moon. So maybe that's where it comes from, like community cycling. But then I was introduced to the art of fertility astrology and the understanding that women actually experience a secondary fertile window during their cycles when the moon is in the same phase that it was in at the moment of their birth. So this brought a whole new dimension into my awareness, because then I started thinking, well, maybe it's not so cut and dry that women are quote unquote supposed to be, bleeding with the new moon. Maybe we're more individual than that, as usual, right? Constantly coming down to how individual we all are. And that actually we have our own unique relationship with the moon and ways in which our body responds to the moon. So that brought in like a whole new layer of understanding for me.
That's fascinating. So if you are sort of interested in understanding this, I guess you would, keep track of your cycles, and then would you kind of try to connect that to the moon phases and then get the chart from there? Or would you more look at like a natal astrology chart of when you were born? Like, where would you start kind of unpacking the astrology of your cycle?
Yeah, well, the easiest thing you can do is acquire a copy of your natal chart. And I have resources through my podcast and my Substack and my website on how to do all of this. So if you are interested, you can acquire a copy of your natal chart, and then you can identify the phase that the moon was in at that moment of your birth, because the natal chart is essentially a picture of the sky, the cosmos, and all of its placements at that moment of birth in which you were imprinted by these energetics. And I do recommend that you kind of learn how to do the calculations and add up what your specific fertile arc degree is, because you can go by the moon phase, but the moon spends about 45 degrees traveling through each phase. So she is going to kind of like, at some point, let's say you were born during a full moon, at some point she is going to leave that close conjunction with that specific natal placement, but still technically be in the full moon phase. So it just depends on what you're trying to get out of this information. So I really do encourage you to use the chart. Also, like I've been asked before, like, can I just Google, what phase was the moon was in on August 1st, 1975 or whatever. But when you do that, sometimes you get different answers. I'm noticing, especially now that I'm playing with a lot of different moon apps on my phone, so that I know what to recommend to people. So half of them say you're in one phase, and the other half says, oh no, she's moved on and she's in the next phase now. So again, that's why it's really empowering to be able to download the chart and do the calculation on your own, and then kind of like know for sure exactly where that moon was at the moment of your birth.
I mean, in terms of astrology, most people tend to focus on like natal and predictive astrology. Can you like define medical astrology for those who might not be familiar with it?
Yeah, so medical astrology is sort of the study of the planetary influences on our bodies in terms of a more physiological perspective, right? So most people are familiar with kind of psychological astrology, like, oh, this placement makes you more outgoing or confident or more dreamy or more intuitive, or, all these personality related type of things. But the planets are also the planets are, first of all, associated and have been assigned to different organs and organ systems and body zones, and they have so been assigned for many, 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 many years, potentially even as far back as the Babylonian era, when all this information started getting pieced together. But then the planets also influence certain constitutions or actions upon the body. So, for example, Mars rules inflammation. And then let's say you have a Mars placement in, for some reason I want to say Cancer. Well, Cancer rules the stomach, and Cancer also rules the womb. So if a woman is coming to me with like very easily inflamed womb, for example, and maybe it's bringing a lot of heat into her cycle, she has other symptoms to support this, blah, 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 and then you look into the chart, and then it provides another testimony for like, oh yeah, you are more constitutionally predisposed to express your healing in this way. And I say it very specifically in that way because I do want to kind of change the narrative, like modernize the narrative a little bit on medical astrology, and that it's not about the planets creating pathology in the body or disease in the body as much as it is a constitutional imprint that influences how your body chooses to express its healing.
That makes a lot of sense. Back to something you said a little bit earlier, I had a thought. How would like a lunar eclipse impact the sort of monthly cycle? Because I know those can be quite disruptive astrological events in most discussions of the planets. How would that impact, or do you think it would kind of just have minimal impact?
Well, it's going to be very dependent on the individual. Again, some people are very affected by lunar cycles. Some people are not as affected. Some people have certain placements in their chart that make them more susceptible to lunar influences. Also, wherever that eclipse is hitting you in your chart is probably going to have an impact as well. So, it's like you have your natal chart, and then you have all the planets that are, in their current placements now. So wherever those are kind of passing through your natal chart, we call those transits. And that's really going to show you how those placements are going to be hitting your kind of energetic body. So, some people, if you look at like astrologers that are a little more nuanced, they'll kind of be able to say things like, okay, well, this full moon is in Aquarius, but depending on which house Aquarius is in your chart, this moon is going to highlight these themes in that area of your chart, because all the houses are associated with different parts of our lives and also parts of our bodies. So it can become very individualized. But eclipses are considered to be very disruptive in general. I can't even imagine what's going on there with the ionization aspect that we talked about earlier. And it is generally has been taught and passed down that it is not an ideal time to try to conceive a child. So basically 48 hours before the first eclipse in an eclipse season until 48 hours after the last eclipse in an eclipse season is not a time where you want to be trying to have a baby. So there's going to be like, a 2-week period, I think twice a year, where it's kind of, it's suggested that you avoid that window. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers the eclipse aspect. But like I said, it's going to be very individual to how you are impacted by.
When you're if you do any sort of like spiritual things throughout your month or have some sort of practice or whatever, are there certain things that you should avoid doing during certain parts of your cycle? Because I think it can be beneficial, and I don't know if you agree with this, I think you probably will, to kind of orient how you go throughout your month around these type of phases. What would be your advice if someone's trying to do that, I guess?
Before, I think it's really important to start by just cultivating your sense of self-awareness. Our culture kind of teaches us to be deeply dissociated from our bodies, especially our emotional body and our psychic body. So, it can be helpful to introduce yourself to all these like frameworks and archetypes and things, but ultimately you are going to be responsible for your own body literacy and your own uniqueness. So no matter what kind of journey somebody is on, whether they're trying to optimize their cycle or they're trying to move through a healing of some kind, developing that sense of self-awareness really can take you such a long way. And just starting by noticing how you feel on these days, What happened? What did you want to eat? Did any symptoms arise? How did you sleep? Like, if you really recorded, like, kept a diary for a complete menstrual cycle, and then went back and like wrote on the top of each page, like cycle day 1, cycle day 2, cycle day 3, like, you might be able to clearly see a pattern that exists for yourself. And that can be really empowering, because now you get to understand yourself in a whole new way, and you can orient around that. And there's all kinds of holistic practices and rituals that you can execute during, you can use ritual to honor your ovulation. You can use ritual to honor your menstrual cycle. There's like all different schools of thought on what to do and not do when you're bleeding. In Ayurveda, it's like they don't bathe. The women don't bathe. They don't cook. They don't garden. They pretty much have separated themselves from the influence of those elements, so like the water element and the earth element, and they're basically resting and nourishing themselves, and puttering about, and just, oh my God forbid that we're bored for a little bit, or in a period of self-reflection. So you can go down all kinds of rabbit holes on sort of how you want to incorporate these practices into your personal cycle. And it is going to be very unique to your lifestyle and what is reasonable for you to do, what feels true for you, what feels nourishing for you. This is something else that we explore through my sessions with women where I do their chart readings, is that we often find that there are very strong themes in their natal chart that support things that they already kind of had inklings about, like bringing a lot of the fire element into their routines, or a lot of the water element into their self-care practices, because it brings balance into that constitution. So it really is going to be unique to everyone. And then you might find, depending on your situation, that you need to make some major life changes. Like, there are ways to bring this stuff into your lifestyle, even if you're working a corporate job, or even if you are, whatever, XYZ. But a lot of times our healing expressions are very insistent and loud announcements from the body that something real needs to change, right? That like our ways of life need to change, that like the relationships we have, the family that we keep, the jobs that we hold on to. Like, sometimes these are the things in our life that actually need to change in order for us to heal. Not what herb you take, not what protocol you go on, not what ritual that you start doing because you saw someone on Instagram do it, right? Like, these are like real deep introspective questions that we need to start asking ourselves and looking at when we're on a journey of being in alignment with our cycles and our body's needs and our unique healing experiences.
Yeah, you've been mentioning the elements a little bit. How do the elements relate to these cycles? And what are those kind of correspondence?
Yeah, well, the elements are really just a way to organize how we experience the world. I think it's kind of like how I would describe them. And they do kind of stem all the way back to sort of like Greek science and philosophy, where it's kind of like, oh, everything is either made out of the earth, fire, water, or air, and then ultimately like kind of the ethers were sort of added into the mix to sort of actually create 5 elements there. But you can start categorizing. You can categorize plants into these elements. The plants have elemental rulerships. You can categorize rituals into these elements. You can categorize food into these elements. So let's say you're somebody who really wants to start working more with water. Bathing rituals are a way to bring water into your life. Physically visiting bodies of water, bathing in rivers and streams, and thanking bodies of water, having ritual around that, being in relationship with it, visiting springs, getting your drinking water from springs, working with plants that are ruled by the water element. So like some of our more moistening demulcent plants are ruled by water, including plants that you wouldn't expect. Like I believe nettles, for example, is ruled by water, but also by Mars. So a lot of plants have kind of unique properties to them in that way, because a lot of them are very intelligent and actually bring balance into the body. So they kind of, represent an array of different kinds of energies. What else? You could even like adorn yourself with like jewelry that represents water to you. You could wear like pearls or start a collection of oyster shells for your altar, right? Like there's all kinds of creative ways that you can bring water, like these elements into your rituals. And like I said, through food as well, like obviously working with nourishing like soups and broths and infusions are all really great ways to have that nourishing water element come into your lifestyle.
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. I think the elements, they clearly, have a real impact to all of this. A topic that I was interested in sort of broaching a little bit is what are big mistakes people are making throughout their cycle that could possibly not like harm them or, not allow them to optimize their spirituality throughout it.
Well, I mean, if you want to put it through the lens of spirituality, I mean, being within a human body is a spiritual experience. Whether you think you're on a spiritual path, or you meditate, or you chant, or you wear mala beads, or whatever, you have incarnated into a human body, and therefore you're on a spiritual journey. And being a woman adds even additional depth to that, because now you are the keeper of life and death. And you are cycling every month, and you are in a tune with the moon, whether or not you think you're in a relationship with her, she's in a relationship with you, and it's all creating layers of depth into your connection with nature, which is, of course, quite spiritual. So I guess if considering that, how would you approach your cycle in a way that would interfere with that connection? So first of all, dissociating from your cycle and your body. I understand that there are certain circumstances in women's lives in which they don't feel that they can take responsibility for their cycles. And in those situations, maybe pharmaceutical products are necessary, but we need to also be honest about what those tools are for. And so if you are in a position to take responsibility for your cycles, then I would explore not utilizing those tools and allowing your cycle to express itself so that you can start working with her, especially if you are using those tools because you think that they are going to help you heal, which of course they don't help you heal. They just manipulate your symptoms so that you can ignore them. So that is first and foremost. That I would consider if I want to be in relationship with my cycle. And then, like I said earlier, cultivating self-awareness once you are sitting with your cycle and working with her every month. And then maybe there's some, most women have some level of like body, I don't know what to call it. I guess I will say body issues. I don't really know what to call it right now. But like most women are not connected with their body in a way that is a positive experience, right? Like your blood is disgusting and you're just like, this might be graphic, but like you're just like, pulling your tampon out and throwing it in the toilet and like you just don't, you don't want to touch it and you want to look at it. And like, most women have never even seen their vulva in a mirror. Let alone know that it's called a vulva and not a vagina. So there's a lot to explore there in terms of like, are you really comfortable inhabiting your body? In terms of also being with your blood, like a lot of these convenience products that women have been sold to make a profit is not serving us. And yeah, there are a lot of, organic cotton things on the market right now and stuff like that. But like, most of the products that women are using for their cycles are GMO cotton, sprayed with chemicals, fragrance, like what? Like just, just tons of toxins that actually are absorbed by the tissues of the walls of the vagina and directly contribute to hormone dysfunction and infertility. So also having awareness about that. And then some people are going to say, well, Athena, like, have you seen the price of these crazy organic cotton pads? Like, I can't afford this, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, you don't have to, because you also can choose to not be disconnected from your blood and buy reusable fabric pads that you can just wash every month that will literally last you for like years potentially, and you'll actually save tons of money. So like, it's just a matter of like, how closely are you willing to be in relationship with your blood, where you're not all freaked out and like not wanting to touch it, and so then you're trying to use all these convenience products that cost a fortune, because you just want to throw it away, right? And that's a big game changer too. And there's also even more advanced levels to that, like especially if you're using reusable cotton pads to bleed on, then you can save your blood and you can give it back to the earth and fertilize your plants, and it's like a whole thing. So I think that trajectory of thinking that I just went down right there is probably enough for most women to start with in terms of really embodying their cycle as part of their human experience, spiritual journey, whatever you want to call it.
I think those are some really, valuable first steps. As my sort of final question for you, and it's kind of a vague one. What advice would you give to any women listening to the show who might want to learn more about this or take the next step?
Obviously, you can come check out the work that I'm publishing, and see if any of it resonates with you and is helpful for you. Of course, there are tons of women out there who are also doing this work, and focusing even more on, menstrual health. This is entirely new to you. I promise that there are so many women out there who are doing this work, incredible work, even on Instagram, who have classes and courses, and also there's really great books that you can start with out there. Like if you're brand new to the fertility awareness method, Taking Charge of Your Fertility is kind of like a classic one. And of course, if your audience is more interested in the astrological and the esoteric, and maybe they already are familiar with their cycles, they can just like hop right on over to what I'm doing at Wild Willing Wisdom on Instagram, and also at wildwillingwisdom.com. There you can like kind of connect to all my offerings and all my stuff. And I have, a lot of information out right now about the basics too. I just started the Cosmic Conceptions podcast a couple months ago. So I'm kind of like taking everybody through, like kind of like the 101 of everything. So that's where I would go next if you're ready to take it, your practice into like that next level.
Lovely. Thank you so much for coming on. And with that, that's our show. This has been your host, Georgina Rose. If you want to support this show, please hop over to our Patreon. On the Patreon, you get every episode early. You get a bonus pre-show with every episode, which is a little solo show I do before my guest joins the conversation. And you get a bonus episode 8 times a year, which are little solo episodes from me. You can listen to this show on YouTube and most podcasting platforms. If you're on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe. And if you're on a podcasting platform, please leave a review. You can find me on most platforms. I am on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Substack, YouTube, Telegram, Patreon, and all that. If you're high enough Patreon, I will read your name out every episode. So thank you so much to Charlotte Dickin Lee Smalter. Your continued contributions truly benefit the show. I will see you all in the next one. Have a great night, day, mid-morning, mid-afternoon, whatever time it is, wherever you are.